During COVID-19's pandemic, governments have taken a crucial role by providing regulations and policies for mitigation. A policy to implement measures protecting public health and the role of regional governments has also been very crucial in understanding that the pandemic containment is not a one fit for all, especially at a national level. Jakarta was challenged as a nation, is in dire need of ads both on medical services, economic subsidies, and fiscal stimulus for the society, while at the same time lost its tax income due to the pandemic. However, the pandemic can also be a momentum for digitalization, reformation of bureaucracy, prioritizing budget for health expenditures, and better disaster mitigation.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the habits of Indonesian people in every aspect of life. Jakarta is no exception. For its local governments, handling numbers of issues is done in more adaptive ways. From transportations, digitalizations, urban spatial planning, up to economic issues. In the Regional Government Budget Expenditure or APBD of DKI Jakarta 2020, a change happened from priorly planned, from almost 88 trillion rupiah to 63.2 trillion rupiah. It's all because of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that hits hard on local revenues. For APBD plan in 2021, Jakarta Government and the Jakarta Council, DPRD, has agreed to a budget of 84.1 trillion rupiah. Most of that budget allocated to COVID-19 handling.
Pelaksanaan paripurna DPRD hari ini selesai dengan nilai 84 triliun, sekian.
Jakarta administration takes steps to implement large-scale social restriction or PSBB as COVID-19 cases continue to rise in the capital city. Since COVID-19 reaching Jakarta, city administrations have extended 16 times PSBB period. That's including transitional PSBB and emergency brake policy in past September. Now, Jakarta and its bureaucracy have to adapt to the pandemic and further impact. Jakarta is not alone. Collaborations can help the city vision.
And now to start a policy discussion, let us first say hello to our participants. And hello everyone, I hope everyone's doing well today, and thank you so much for staying with us in our forum. And for those of you on Zoom, if you'd like to ask questions after the presentations delivered by our speakers, we'd like to invite you to please write your questions on the chat box located just below the big screen on Zoom. And for those of you on YouTube, you can write your questions on the comment section. Thank you so much. So now, everyone, to lead the discussion on governance and urban policy, we have Mr. Patrick Kelly, the Managing Director for Strategic Consulting of Happold Consulting. And to start on this very topic of governance and urban policy, 2020 has undoubtedly shown us the true colors of so many world leaders and of the policies that need changing. So, Mr. Kelly, I hope you're doing well today. So, my first question is for you. What are your hopes for 2021, and what do you think needs urgent changing as soon as we start the new year?
I guess it's been a very difficult year, but this recession and this pandemic is unlike many others. We're in a situation where we have got very low interest rates and low inflation, generally speaking, around the world. So governments have I think they have a great opportunity here to be able to invest in public services, to be able to invest in employment protection, because this is temporary. We've seen already that actually that the world can respond, the economy can respond very quickly when, in a way, demand is allowed to when people are able to go out and shop and do things in the normal way.
Excellent insight, Mr. Kelly. Now let's say hello to our speakers.
Good morning, good afternoon, speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Amin Sabeki, and Dr. Amin is the head of the chief of the delivery unit for Jakarta government. And he has over 25 years experience working in SOEs, working in the private sector, World Bank, the tsunami in Aceh, etc. So he's got massive experience, and he's going to talk about how the government of Jakarta have managed through the pandemic, how they've managed through this very, very difficult time, the changes which they've had to make, and under very difficult conditions with reduced revenues, etc. We have our second speaker is Bernie de Jonapuro, and he is a chairman of the Planning Ethics Board, Indonesian Association of Urban and Regional Planners. He also works as a senior advisor and executive director for Ernst & Young, and he advises investors, corporations, agencies, and central government in Indonesia and the Southeast Asian region. He specializes in financing infrastructure, PPP, for urban projects, and he's got more than 30 years experience. And we've got Amelia Sais. Amelia is she is the Secretary General of United Cities and Local Government. She's got a career in, I suppose, providing a bridge between central and local government. And we're looking forward to today. Amelia is going to talk about many aspects of how cities have changed and how those changes are going to move forward into the future. Welcome, panel. I would like, first of all, to start with Dr. Amin Sebeki. Can I ask you to make your presentation, please?
Thank you, Parik, for a very nice introduction. It's a long time no see you, and it's good to see you again, although this time only through a virtual platform.
Nice to see you again.
So today I'd like just to offer 4 ideas on how cities can navigate itself post-COVID-19. So as cities are facing unprecedented situation, extraordinary responses are needed. So I hope these ideas can then elicit further thoughts and the discussion from everyone here. With whom I'm honored to be sharing this moment. So first idea is urban policy should focus on the people. So I repeat, the people. Secondly, as the environment is rapidly changing, the government must adapt responsive policy making as the new norm. And thirdly, together we are stronger. Thus, cities need to establish a platform that enables everyone to work together effectively. And lastly, the city government should take the first step and lead by the example. So moving forward in this discussion, I will further explain the concept of those ideas along with practical examples that have been implemented in the context of Jakarta. So when we talk about cities, we need to remind ourselves that what makes cities alive? It is the citizen. What I mean by citizen is citizen refer not only to the individuals, but also entities such as households, communities, civil society organizations, including the businesses. Each of them is unique in their needs and interests. And cities will grow better only when the policymaking are able to include the people throughout the process, hence answering their differing needs. So based on that thinking, Jakarta has adopted what we call a City 4.0 approach. That's as a co-creator of development rather than merely a resident receiving services. And we see the government as the empowering collaborators to the people rather than merely an administrators of public services. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen how technological advancements are changing the way we live. However, we have never ever seen any changes taking place as rapid as we are experiencing since the beginning of this pandemic. This tide of change is too big to be ignored. It demands cities to surf on top of it, otherwise drown beneath it. It demands cities to be responsive. So let me give you a practical illustration on this. For example, on the policy of land use planning and zoning, which integral part in shaping the urban landscape, typically designate areas into certain purposes. One part is dedicated for commercial, another for residential, and so on. That designation created a linear mobility pattern known as origin and destination that constitute the transportation planning. Such designation also affect decisions on issuing a business permit, where officials typically require business entities to be located in the areas where it is permissible. However, as we see during this pandemic, most of the workforce and students are working and studying remotely, and in many cases within the same locations or areas. So segregating areas into certain purposes become irrelevant as mobility patterns become nonlinear. And as mobility becomes limited, virtual and contactless interactions are on the rise and dropping down demands on physical space. Although they sound simple, but those facts change the basic assumption that constitute existing urban policies, especially the land use planning and zoning. And it demands those policies to be reviewed and, of course, adopted quickly. Since 2018, Jakarta is shifting its land use paradigm from car-oriented into transit-oriented. Included in this paradigm is expansions of mixed-use zoning that allow residents and business and other purposes to be built within a compact district around transit hub. We seek to enrich this existing approach by with more elements of digitalization and formalize what we call a digital plus transit-oriented approach on the upcoming review of the land use planning that is targeted to be done in the next year, 2021. As an immediate response to the rise of digitalizations, we are making sure that no citizen is left behind. Until now, we have provided 9,000 free Jack Wi-Fi spots around the city and will expand further to cover more. Recently, Jakarta received the Sustainable Transport Award for its groundbreaking work in transforming the city and its transport system. Throughout Jakarta's history, the prestigious award in transportation was the first for us to receive. And surprisingly, we came on top of the other notable cities around the world and become the first city in Southeast Asia to receive it. One of the main reasons why Jakarta won the award is substantial increase in ridership growth and improvement. Within a year, the city achieved more than 40% growth of Transjakarta's ridership. In 2018, we have 600,000 daily ridership. And in 2019, we hit the record of 1 million daily ridership. One might ask, how is that possible? The key to that achievement was integration. Integration between different modes, integrations of routes, and integrations of fares and payments, all of which offer convenience in traveling with public transport and allowing people to make their best rational choice. Now the question might be, so is made it possible through collaboration? Big changes become attainable when we invite and put everyone together to achieve a common goal. That everyone in this context include communities, central governments, Indonesia Railway, PT KAI, our regional owned corporations such as MRT, BRT, LRT, the private companies running the angkots, civil society organization, and even online transportation providers. Now imagine if the magnitude of reform, if such collaboration can be scaled up to other sectors. In a nutshell, city government should expand their focus from managing limited internal resources to include orchestrations of external stakeholders who carry immense and untapped resources to bring a better service to the people. In Jakarta, that idea underpins our platform of Jakarta Development Collaboration Network. In this platform, we acknowledge all parties of the development, be it the internal institution within the government, local government, and central government, civitas academia, the international community, association, private sector, SMEs, civil society, and many others to reach the common objective of the city. This is a long journey, but as China's prophet has said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and Jakarta has taken those steps. Indeed, Co-creation through orchestrating models between government and its stakeholders is becoming a large portion of our policy making. We invite all to join in the conversation and then take part in the action. So with that, Parik, let me stop here. Thank you again very much. And I would welcome further thoughts from other speaker, Pak Bernie and also Amelia, as well as from the audience. Thank you very much. I'll give it back the time to you, Parik. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amin. We're going to wait until the end, I think, to take questions and answers. To invite him to
the dialogue that we are working on post-COVID. I think it is timely for us to have a look what we think when we talk about adaptive urban policies. Next, if you can go to the next slides, yeah. No. So I think the pandemic have changed all our lives in most cities, and I still remember we started this when we start this early curve of the pandemic in March. I was one of the first one to recover from COVID-19, a severe case, and I was personally experienced how difficult it was when early March there's nothing there. To today, we have confirmed almost 700,000 today. So this has been a very long journey for any country, any cities to be able to cope with such a pandemic that unprecedented. Next, so let's have the next slide. So probably the pandemic cannot be isolated from what all cities are facing today, which is we are at the height of urbanization. And Indonesia, as research shows, that we are probably one of the most urbanized area in this part of the world. We are transforming into urban very rapidly, and with that, we can see that issues in urban areas is becoming a national issues. Next, so the thinking today among city governments and cities in Indonesia is how do we look at future cities in our country, including Jakarta as the main trendsetter, if you wish, or the main drivers of what urban transformations is on the work in the country. As Pak Amin mentioned just now, I think the transformations of Jakarta as a city and all the planning activities behind that is actually at the height today, where urban regenerations and developments of a new revitalized area of the city is becoming the main feature of what Jakarta government needs to achieve today. So urbanization and transformation become an urban society coupled with the pandemic provides us an unprecedented environment where city governments, planners, and all stakeholders need to look. Let me go next. Now, suddenly we need to look at what will city look like post-COVID. How do we fight the pandemic, but at the same time keep the city order, keep planning on effect? Next, and this has been main concerns of any planners. Suddenly, we look at density as an issue. Are we planning our cities accordingly? Suddenly, you have a CBD that is not working as what we planned before. Infections are high in urban areas. Cities that are truly connected globally has become a risk for society. Contagion are everywhere. And now as we're seeing the second and third wave of the pandemic, I think it's time for us to look what cities need to be done, what kind of policies and governance needs to be in place. Next. So I would like to, I guess, bring this discussion to look at how do cities prioritize? At the moment, as the pandemic started in March to today, three things that cities working on at the moment. These are the key priorities: a quick response, which mainly on governance around making sure the well-being of our people, preparing for an economic downturn that is going to be with us for a while. And secondly is developing the stimulus that will make government be able to help citizens to cope with the downturn. These are a long journey programs. This is something that we do today on an emergency setting, but require us to think long term. Indonesia has dedicated major funds for the stimulus, and this is something that I think any city government, and especially city of Jakarta, needs to focus on. Can we go to the next slide? So the questions for us in managing our cities becoming these few questions. Were existing urban environments resilient enough to this pandemic? Were our infrastructure support and our supports in place to ensure that effective and efficient risk management is there? And I think third and foremost, would a more sustainable approach to our built environment have helped us manage the city differently? If we have ourselves prepared with a much better regenerated area, with a much well-planned part of the city, would that help in sustaining and coping with the impact of this pandemic? Next. So I would like to bring this to our discussion, I think, and you will see that cities around the world, including Jakarta and other cities, will require to pivot its strategy and its governance and its policy to the pandemic. These include looking at some key urban management issues such as the economy. How do we come up with an innovative financing for the much needed infrastructure that we are building or supposed to be building or supposed to complete? Indonesian government decided to come up with a economic recovery stimulus that is available for local governments to pick up on, and we understand the government also have picked up those low interest or low interest funding to fund the existing as well as the green infrastructure. So city government and Jakarta government will need to reprioritize its programs, reprioritize the key infrastructure to the extent that perhaps some of the infrastructures need to go on a later stage. And then you also have other aspects such as the resiliency programs, how do we prepare for climate change, as well as some emergency measures for the pandemic. Again, pandemic teaches us some unprecedented and disruptions to the plan that we already have. For Jakarta, this is a good time as we are revising our master plan and our detail and zoning plan. this is a good time to insert what mentioned earlier, the City 4.0, to make sure that our plan, our city plan, Jakarta plan, really embedded the city as co-creator in the plan. So with that, I thank for the moderator and would like to see a further discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernie. And finally, I'd like to ask our third speaker, Emilia Sais. Emilia is going to talk about a number of things around innovation and mobility, housing in urban policy settings, including electric vehicles, for, as I said, co-living, etc. Over to you, Emilia. Your presentation, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
The previous speakers have triggered a lot of thinking and reflections. Look, I represent a worldwide organization of cities and local governments. We have over 250,000 members around the world, Jakarta being one of the founding members. And from this global perspective, with so many different realities, what we know is that although there are many different realities, the core needs and the core interests are very much the same. And the pandemic has actually been a kind of a tale of two cities. The worst of times and the best of times, actually. It has shown us that we were not ready, but it has also shown us that we knew many of the things that we had to do, that we had to accelerate to be able to face the challenges of the pandemic. It has shown us that if you put things in the hands of the public sector, this sector can react very rapidly to needs. I fully agree with the previous speakers that there has been a very fast reactions from administrations to tackle some of the most pressing challenges that the pandemic have brought to us. And those are housing, mobility, food, education, and the alternative means to going about our lives, which was basically digitalization. In the reality of the local and regional sectors, this translates into local service provision. The capacity that local governments have had to continue providing services has been incredible. I think many of the people around the world have not even realized that while the world was in the houses, locked down, public service deliveries continue. What the emergency has shown us then is when the full pressure of society is there, when the highest need, when the realization of an emergency is there, then we can mobilize public goods and commons in a way that we don't do in non-crisis situations. And the question that this brings to us is that the way that we need to do things? How many of the temporary measures that cities around the world have taken around putting to the service of the communities public buildings that have not been in use, about providing more food to children that could not access the school meals, about putting public transportation at the service of the communities for free. How many of these temporary measures should be permanent in the future? And how should we finance these measures? You see, it's not about the physical planning or the physical investment only. It's about challenging the model. And most of the challenges that this emergency has shown to us are related to administration, technical management, a detachment, for instance, from the health sector and the rest of the service provision. But they are very connected. You cannot guarantee health security if you don't have safe water to drink, if you don't have waste management properly picked up, if you don't mobilize the health care professionals to their jobs. And this is what cities around the world have been doing. Now, we are very concerned from a global perspective that, and we have been for a while, that local service provision is not sufficiently considered in national or international policy making. And therefore, the finance of these services are solely put into the hands, in many cases, of the local and territorial governments. From our perspective, this is not possible. We will need to change the way that we allow local and regional governments to trigger revenues. We will need to finance this service provision in a different way, because most of our development goals are very dependent on those services. From our perspective, the pandemic has brought public back. Public sector is back. And yes, we cannot do it alone. It needs to be in partnership with other stakeholders, but this is a very critical learning for us. I very much agree with Bernie that we are challenged in our models of transportation. The density, the morphology of cities is being questioned now. But we might need to realize that this has been done for a long time already, and that we are in a moment of transformation where most of the people, in a couple of years, most of the people, around 60% of the population, are going to be working in jobs that we don't know today, that we don't know they are going to exist. We need to plan for the unknown. This is one part of the parcel. The other part is, for a very long time, the thinkers among us, like Bernie and the representative of Jakarta just now, have been saying we had to organize public space in a different way, and that the proportion of public and private space had to be rethought. Maybe the dichotomy was no longer valid. And that is something that we will certainly need to take into account in the future. So what I am asking from this discussion and from everybody that is watching today is to go beyond the obvious and to rethink the models from a broader perspective. Security is now very linked to solidarity. Addressing the needs of the weakest, of the most vulnerable among us is the guarantee of security for everyone. Our cities have been built on inequality, and that is no longer an option. So I would stop here, but let us think of the solutions not only as physical ones. Let us think of solutions from a model perspective. And I am certain that we can transform the worst of times into the best of times for a renewed, better normal.
Thank you so much, Emilia. You ended your talk on a very positive note. I think now we're ready to start our questions and answers. And the first one is from Rimby from Zoom. And it says, it's very interesting thought that the role of government should change from managing to orchestrating. This is a question to Dr. Amin. the government is changing from managing to orchestrating. So having you been inside in the government, what do you think are the key success factors in making this change? And from me, I suppose, to build on that question, collaboration is great, but leadership is also required. So how to get that balance between, I would say, leadership and collaborating and facilitating? How to get that balance right? And do you think Jakarta got it right? And do you think the citizens are ready for that type of leadership that you described earlier, the City 4.0? Over to you, Dr. Amin.
How actually the balance between shifting between the managing model of governance to orchestrating models of governance. First of all, I'd like to pick up what already mentioned before on the challenge that the government is currently facing. Some of them are even paradoxical, like short-term response, but as well as long-term responses. And in terms of the managing orchestrating, I think if in the past the government was beginning was quite dominant to determine the life of people. But then the fact today is actually there are so many parties that can be invited into the orchestration. Models to be adopted also by the government. So what I mean by this is less and less the government having their own direct resources, be it in terms of the money, in terms of the people to deliver the services. But people outside there is having more resources. In the context of Jakarta, for example, if we split the economic composition of Jakarta. Jakarta now have the GDP of 1,800 trillion.
Yes, as we're not hearing very clearly from our speaker to our moderator, Mr. Kelly, I hope you can take over the session.
Right,
Thank
okay,
you.
fine. I guess in a way, I think one of the key things really is, I think in that question, because I think Bernie, the government, or perhaps private sector, private resources, private sector. So how do you see that?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very prompt question to be asked for cities like Jakarta. The way I look at it is this way: Jakarta is one of 4 or 5 biggest metropolitan in the world. So we are seeing certain trends of urban regenerations and revitalizations of part of cities are happening in our major metropolitan, such as London and Tokyo and New York, including Jakarta. So as a city, Jakarta with 12 million in the center and 30 million in the greater Jakarta area, on its own merit provides opportunities to grow. And if you look at the latest development where cities are becoming more compact, technologies have been embraced, all the main trends of revitalizing and regenerate part of our city. Actually, Jakarta offers a range of innovative ways of being able to transform the city with various different modes of financing. Of course, local government financing will still be key to the development and provisions of the main infrastructure, but the opportunity for private sector and players, especially in the utilities and infrastructure area, is also immense. I understand most global players in this space are Jakarta as they are looking at Tokyo and other major cities in the world. Opportunities to develop transit-oriented destinations based on the main transit activities. It's going to be huge. It's only going to trajectory into something that is globally competitive. Yeah. So I'm not worried about global players interested into looking at investing or participating in infrastructure in Jakarta. What we need is, again, for the Jakarta government to create that ecosystem, to create that setup of governance and perhaps policies by way we can work with private sector or any stakeholders to a mutually to be able to develop our part of cities with all the risks are managed, with all the support for policies are in place. And I think Jakarta is now in the verge of putting that all together, if most of it is already there. The development of the TODs within the MRT, I think, is there. Now there needs to be more effort into trying to revitalize parts of the transit. And we are working on that. Jakarta is working hard on that. We still have some gaps in local policies vis-a-vis central government policies on urban regeneration. Indonesian cities are at the very early curve of having its sound and explicit urban regeneration regulations. So this will be what is happening in Jakarta will set the standards to other cities such as Surabaya, Bandung, Makassar, and all.
Can I just come back in there, Bernie? One of the problems that cities, I would say governments have, is that bureaucracy takes time. It takes a long time to, whether it be through planning policy, through implementation mechanisms, etc. What we've seen here really is that some things, we've seen that in a way, because necessity drove the change, we've seen a lot of changes take place where a lot of the bureaucracies have been bypassed and things have changed. Whether it's about, and maybe Amelia would like to answer this question too, is that actually we've seen transit actually within cities. We've seen temporary barriers put up for pedestrians, for cyclists, for a lot of things that have taken place, which in a way, if we'd gone through the previous systems, they would have taken years to get implemented. And yet they've taken place very quickly now. So how to move from that very slow process to one that is more responsive and collaborative. So first of all, Bernie, if you would like to comment briefly on that, can we do that? Implementing TODs takes a long time. Implementing even transit systems takes a long time. So first of all, you, and then to Amelia.
I think it should be a combination of a transformation or reform in the way we build or format our detailed plan, our master plan. Okay, a visionary plan is needed here so that public activities can be directed into a more perhaps a better environment. But also very important is a proactive government that is willing to change. We are seeing this in Indonesia, in major cities, including Jakarta, that leaders, in this case governors or mayors, are starting to take that non-business as usual kind of out-of-the-box approach. Right? It looks at some point a little bit out of unusual what we see, but in times it will become a transformative way. I think it's possible, but certainly the policy development needs to catch up, or else we are going to end up ourselves with difficult situations of overlaps and legalistic issues in nature.
Over to you, Emilio. How do you see that the sort of emergency decision making, almost like policy on the hoof, that sort of approach? How do you see that actually we can move forward with a transformed mechanism, process, bureaucracy?
Yeah, we certainly think that we need to look at this question. And in fact, we have an emergency governance initiative that we are putting in place with the London School of Economics and UCLG, researching how this is happening around the world. There is no question that we need more flexibility in the capacity of policy making in the administrations. But there is also no question that we need to be very careful about how we use that flexibility. So we need to transform the legal frameworks that allows local administrations to take decisions, is unquestionable. But we will also, in parallel, need to enhance the capacity of local administration to consult with the public. The administration cannot solely decide what is good or what is bad. The difference between a crisis and an emergency and a normal situation, a more day-to-day situation, is that in emergency, we all share what the priority is. In a day-to-day situation, maybe the view on the priority is not shared. And there is a very thin line between efficiency and authoritarianism. there is a very thin line that we need to prevent from happening. So we are also seeing, for instance, how the emergency is leading many parts of the world to re-centralize decision making. That is dangerous. However, I do think that we will need to make the decision-making mechanisms more flexible, and that means cutting through a lot of red tape in terms of administrations that needs to be consulted. We will need new mechanisms for decision making where the communities are represented in a more structural manner. There is no question about this.
How to balance the different stakeholders within those wider stakeholders, whether they're individual, say, cyclists, public transit riders, car owners. We've seen the people that have been more scared, and Jakarta has achieved great ridership in terms of public transit, but in many parts around the world, you've seen people have been scared of public transit, and so people are now cycling, or actually we're seeing people go back to cars again. And so some of the changes that were made in cities to actually accommodate cyclists, etc., we're seeing sort of a battle between different stakeholder groups, the walkers and the cyclists versus the cars. How do you see that? How do you see government being able to manage that quite polarized view of the future? Amelia, again.
Yes, I think the most important thing is to look at this not as a simple mobility issue, but as a model for the city. And that discussion has been taking place in many cities around the world. The cities that had already started to have this discussion from a broader perspective, from the perspective of tackling climate change, decreasing the levels of pollution, increasing the health quality, have been suffering less in the implementation of these new things. And then the relationships between the different actors are less polarized. It's also true that we need to change the narrative a little. A person is not per se only a car owner or only a cyclist or only a walker. In different moments of our life, we are all of those things. So it is important to look at it from a more holistic approach, the model of city that you want to have. How do you want the activity in your city to happen? How integrated does that need to be? And again, here I will bring back the issue of public space, which is extremely critical. It's about sharing a joint vision about quality of life, safety, and living together. I think a lot of the polarization that we are seeing in the discussion is not a discussion in the community, but it is a discussion that is triggered by many other interests, the car production, the car industry, etc. I am happy to report that many cities around the world are overcoming these discussions. And we all know that there is a certain degree of sacrifice that we will need to make in the transformation of the model. We have gotten used to things that will need to change in the future. And that will imply that all of us will need to make changes in our life. Hopefully, for the benefit of the bigger things, of the common good.
Thank you very much, Amelia. I think Dr. Amin is now back. Okay, and I'd like to ask him a follow-up question really he talked about the transition, getting 1 million passengers per day sort of on public transit. From managing and orchestrating that change, what was the biggest challenge in achieving that shift?
Yeah, I want to respond to what your previous questions on actually how the government shifting their role from managing to orchestrating. Yeah, and this is basically applied to many instances, for example, in transportation, but also in other sectors. So I guess in the past, the government was quite dominant in many things. For example, they have resources so that they are able to deliver services by themselves. And also they think that they know what the people want, so they develop the policy by themselves. But in today's context, that's really different. So we have to listen to the people. We have to understand what people want, as well as actually we have more and more government has limited resources to deliver their own services. That's why then it's really important for the government to invite other people than to actually part of the solutions. And back to your question previously on the roles of the leadership in this context is actually when there are so many interests and so many voices, it's important the leadership becoming one way to basically make the various interests then come to a conclusion to one particular direction. So that's still important, the elements of leadership. It does not necessarily mean that when we adopt or the government adopt the model for orchestration, there should be no leadership in this context. But still, the leadership is important. Just like when you are looking orchestra, there's somebody that conducting all the partitures so that the music becoming harmony. So that's basically my point on the previous question that Parik raised before.
Many thanks, Dr. Amin. The question from Ariana was actually how to get this is from on Zoom. How did you manage to get the modal shift to public transit? You talked about your collaborative approach, etc. What was the decisive thing? And of course, the MRT opening and improvements in public transit that clearly has made a part. But how did you manage to achieve that?
Yeah. The classic quote-unquote conflict in the past is between the sectoral issues and regional issues, because there are so many also even government institutions that have different level of authority. For example, the government of Indonesia actually use sectoral way of managing things, when the regional government, of course, sees it from the regional perspective. So the question of how is actually how to invite people to sit together and see it from the different objective and make it into a conclusion, make it into an agreement. So, for example, as I mentioned before, the issue of transport actually, if before people agree that the travel time become less, people don't move to the public transport. So when we are talking about that, means we have to integrate. We have to do integration. Integrations in terms of the integration of the operation, of course, integration of the schedules, integrations of the payment and fares. When we are sitting together with all of the parties, BRT, MRT, central government institutions, central government, I mean the corporation, even the private sector, ojek, as I mentioned, and then people see all the benefit. When people see the benefit, the joint benefit, they come together, and then by having that, then we got into conclusion and then have agreement to move forward together.
Thank you very much. Bernie, one thing that I would like to ask you is, and you work across different organizations and different cities within Indonesia. How do you see that the changes that have taken place in Jakarta could be applied to other cities in Indonesia? This is from Feruli, okay, from CNN YouTube.
One very common challenge for Indonesian cities, and this is same with Jakarta, is the fact that we don't have reliable mass rapid transit system. And we have at the moment more than 10 big metropolitans, and with urbanizations, we are going to have easy 22 to 25 metropolitans growing over 1.5 million, 2 million. And this will require a major investment into mass rapid transit for people to transit, to commute as well. And none is available. So the innovative approach and the participative nature of private sector, global players, as well as local funding capabilities that is happening today in Jakarta, as well as the involvement of the locally owned, state-owned company, will become a model. Moving forward, when Jakarta be able to untangle the policies, framework issues about urban regenerations and TODs, this will definitely become the model and followed by other cities. We do have a ministerial decrees on how to develop part of the cities to accommodate that growth, but Jakarta will become the first precedent of how we do it. Now we are seeing major initiatives going toward starting to develop those infrastructure in other cities. That is one on infrastructure. The second is, I think, how do city government work with the larger stakeholders? And I think we are already seeing how cities are starting to look at Jakarta as a model in terms of the executive, the government work with the legislative branch locally, supported by a group of delivery unit or management system around the leadership of the city. And this has been mimicked or followed by other cities. Some are successful, some are not. And I think this trend will continue, and we will definitely see more of this around the Indonesian cities.
Thank you very much. I suppose a follow-up on the same theme, really, for Amelia. How do you see the learning? And we have seen really some cities really make incredible change, I think, during the last 9 months. But how can we see that the best practice, and given your experience of linking between across countries, between center and region and city, how do you see best practice, inverted commas, because best practice is very difficult to really establish necessarily 100%, but how do you see the best practice being shared across different cities, different regions?
Cities are living beings. Cities, I very much agree with colleagues. Cities are the people. They are organic beings. They are not buildings or infrastructure, and therefore cities are learners. They are learning systems, and they have always been learning from each other and learning of themselves. Just to give you a very vivid example, my world organization is the inheritor of a century-old movement. The first international meeting of cities around the world, the first World Congress of Cities took place before the United Nations existed in 1913. Cities were already learning then. And planning was on the agenda, public space was on the agenda. The cities around the world are learning from each other all the time. It's a continuum system, which I feel very proud to say that my organization, United Cities and Local Governments, contributes to. So it goes beyond best practices. They visit each other, they have contacts with each other. They keep a close watch on how some of the innovations are taking place, and they also strategize together. A good learning exchange is not only about showing each other what they are doing or the new mechanisms or the new tools they are implementing, but it's about strategizing together about what type of city they want to develop. I also have to admit and do some self-critique in a way. We have also shared bad practices around the world. We copy each other, we fall into dynamics, and then we realize that some of those dynamics are not working. I am talking, for instance, about the siloed planning that some decades ago was implemented in many cities in Europe, and that was exported to Latin America. Typically, those cities where you have an area for work, an area for play, an area for living, which have failed in the model. What we see now is that the type of city that we need to foster is a city where everything is within reach, where we use the density to ensure that there are all types of service provision, not to accumulate people that need to move within the city, but actually to make sure that we can create together, be innovative together, offer services at a scale, but within a 15-minute radio, a very popular notion now in many continents. So I am a firm believer that you have to do peer learning, that you need to be in contact with each other, but you need to do it from the perspective of long-term relationships. We foster training among cities. Many of our members are in long-term partnerships with others around the world, and I think it is the only way to go forward. We also need to allow ourselves to fail and to make mistakes sometimes, but to learn from those mistakes and revert them back. And I think that the sector of mobility has known many of those mistakes. But let us think of international cooperation and decentralized cooperation among cities as a system of learning.
I have to intervene, Amelia. I'm being told that actually we're coming to an end now towards the closing statements. We could have gone on for a lot longer, and we could have raised many issues, and perhaps there will be another venue when we can actually speak about that. But I would say that this has been a really interesting discussion. I think that if we were to talk about the all of the things that we've talked about today, we've talked about how we can introduce changes quickly, the changes that we've introduced through the pandemic, how those changes can be made permanent in the way we do things, how we can mobilize the citizen in a city 2.0, as Dr. Amin described earlier, bringing the citizen in as a co-creator, and how we get that, how we combine the collaboration with leadership, with facilitation by the city. That's a crucial aspect to this. How to finance this going forward, because we've talked about how the traditional methods of finance necessarily haven't worked. It hasn't given the resources necessarily to the people who are able to spend it. Too much top down from the center, as Amelia was talking about. What systems are we going to have going forward to finance? Is finance being done? Is part of taxation being decentralized? And people are given much more control of how to spend. What systems will that are introduced throughout the pandemic in terms of bringing citizens into dealing with the pandemic? How can those systems be deployed going forward? How can digitization be employed going forward? Not just in transportation, but in healthcare. Amelia talked about the 15-minute cities, and that's and this is policymakers need to perhaps move more rapidly towards a polycentric or beyond polycentric actually view of a city. That is crucial. How do we do that? Okay, I don't know if Parmeen would like to pass any closing comment on this on that. How do you see those changes sticking?
Yeah, thank you, Porrick. And yeah, that's actually the one that we are facing. I mean, we see the massive change, and we see this pandemic, and in a positive way, actually pandemic is a process of accelerated change. And we in the government has to also adjust to that change. So as I said, I just want to emphasize what I mentioned before, that it is time for us to be hand in hand, so that the model of the government itself in doing the governance is actually shifting from managing limited internal resources that we have, and then shifting the orchestrations and inviting everybody to be part of the development, than to have a better service to the people. I guess I just want to say that, Porrick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I think our time's up. We can hand back to the host again.
Mr. Kelly, for wonderfully moderating the session, and thank you so much to our dearest speakers. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with all of us. We've gained such incredible insights from you, and I hope that our audience has learned a lot as we enter 2021. We're almost ending 2020 now. Let us end the year with more preparation, more positivity, with a better pep on our step. Thank you so much, everyone. And that concludes our panel discussion on governance and urban policy. In the midst of economic and health recovery and global upheaval, if there's one thing that we shall all focus on during the pandemic, is that it is disasters and pandemics like this that remind all of us the common humanity we all share. I'm Amelia Yahya signing off, and after the break, we'll come back with an awarding ceremony plus Jakarta Award and JDCN Lifetime Achievement. Thank you.
hadir untuk mengajak Anda berkolaborasi bangun kota. Memangnya ada apa di Jakarta? Jakarta, sebuah kota dengan 11 juta jiwa yang terisi dalam 661,5 km luasnya, lebih dari 4 abad usianya, punya segudang cerita. Mulai dari kisah asmara, raih cita-cita, membangun keluarga, buat usaha, hingga berkontribusi untuk sesama. Semua itu diisi dalam ragam rasa dan juga asa yang berbeda, tapi ada satu hal yang sama, ada kolaborasi di dalamnya. Menurut KBBI, kolaborasi berarti suatu perbuatan kerjasama. Mari kita telisik. Mewujudkan satu hari yang baik untukmu pergi bekerja misalnya, sudah perlu berbagai tangan di dalamnya. Keluarga yang saling menyemangati, polisi lalu lintas yang menjaga agar tetap lancar dan kamu tidak terlambat, petugas Transjakarta yang menjaga suasana hati supaya terus semangat, hingga petugas tanaman yang merawat setiap tanaman di jalan agar tanaman yang biasa kamu lihat terus rupawan. Jadi, Jakarta bukan hanya lagi tentang aku, kamu, dan dia, tapi kita. Kita dan kota yang sudah berusia lebih dari 4 abad. Kita dan seluruh isi kota saling bertahan. Satu harimu saja dimulai dari satu kolaborasi, bagaimana kalau 469 tahun? Silahkan kau bayangkan. Jadi, saat kota memanggil, ayo kita jawab. Caranya mudah saja. Kamu bisa gunakan seperangkat kecil gawaimu untuk sebarkan semangat kolaborasi kota lewat media. Kamu punya Instagram, kamu bisa lihat berbagai cerita kolaborasi singkat dan informasi apa yang sedang ada di Jakarta. Mau lebih lagi? Kunjungi saja situs kami di plusjakarta.com. Di sini, kamu bukan sekedar bisa membaca, tapi juga menulis cerita. Ceritakan seluruh idemu, apa yang menjadi gagasanmu untuk bangun kota ini. Lalu diskusikan, siapa tahu bisa terwujudkan. Lebih lagi, kamu punya YouTube yang bisa kamu jadikan sarana untuk berikan gambaran seluruh orang tentang kolaborasi yang sudah terbangun. Yang paling penting, semua akan berakhir dengan dampak. Akan ada sebuah tindakan nyata yang muncul nantinya. Berawal dari perasaan, kesadaran, jadi tindakan. Sudah siap? Selamat datang, teman kolaborasi.
Mimpi saya untuk DKI Jakarta bahwa mobilitas warga ingin saya tidak lagi menggunakan mobil pribadi, tetapi sebagian besar mobilitas warga itu menggunakan angkutan massal, angkutan publik, ya, sepeda dan jalan kaki.
Semoga Jakarta menjadi kota yang lebih kuat untuk menghadapi berbagai tantangan yang ada di depan nanti. Walaupun sulit, saya yakin Jakarta dan masyarakat Jakarta bisa saling bekerja sama, berkolaborasi untuk menggerakkan Jakarta lebih baik lagi.
Yang ketiga adalah Jakarta sebagai classroom without walls, di mana para pelajar, anak-anak, murid juga bisa belajar dari mana aja dan di mana aja di setiap penjuru kota kita Jakarta.
Mimpi saya buat Jakarta di tahun 2021 sih lebih ke bisa bertahan dan bangkit dari kondisi yang ya kita semua udah tahu lah ya, saat ini kayaknya lagi gak baik banget gitu. Jadi buat saya yang penting tuh Jakarta bisa bertahan dan bangkit lagi.
Jakarta biar gak berkepanjangan pandeminya, terus istilahnya ya biar ekonominya maksudnya gak berlarut-larut.
Lebih baik lagi dah, biar corona kayak gini hilang. Semoga kayak rame lagi kayak dulu lagi, yang membuat Jakarta rame. Iya. Ya kayak kita orang yang seniman Jakarta.
Kalau menurut saya membuat Jakarta berwarna itu masyarakat sendiri serta warga-warganya yang juga ingin membangun Jakarta lebih baik, seperti mungkin teman saya, rekan kerja saya, bahkan keluarga saya.
Ya tentu yang membuat Jakarta menjadi berwarna adalah warga masyarakat Jakarta sendiri, kemudian pemerintahan, Pemda DKI, dan tentu saja karena Jakarta ibu kota Republik Indonesia, maka siapapun mereka yang beraktivitas di Jakarta itu membuat Jakarta menjadi berwarna.
Karena Jakarta kita, kota kolaborasi.
Karena Jakarta kita, kota kolaborasi.
Jakarta kita adalah kota kolaborasi.
Karena Jakarta kita adalah kota kolaborasi.
Karena Jakarta kita, kota kolaborasi.
Dengan kolaborasi akan lebih optimal dan pastinya kalau kita gandengan tangan rasanya jadi nggak sendiri. Jadi apapun yang kita lakukan bisa jadi lebih baik dan bisa jadi lebih optimal.